Welcome back to your Mortgage Minute by onlendhub.ca. If you are a small landlord in the Greater Toronto Area and you are worried that the new 2026 rental mortgage rules have killed portfolio growth, this episode is for you. Today we are talking about how to still scale from 1 or 2 doors to 3, 4, or even 5 under the so-called no double counting income framework that OSFI has pushed onto the banks. We have our mortgage expert Mouli here. Mouli, can you start with what actually changed and why investors are feeling stuck?
The key change is that regulators are telling banks they cannot recycle the same rental or employment income to support multiple mortgages over and over. If income from a property is already being used to support one loan, it cannot be counted again to classify another mortgage as a low risk general residential exposure. When more than half of the income used to qualify a mortgage comes from the property itself, the bank has to treat it as income producing residential real estate, which forces them to hold more capital and often price it a bit higher. For investors, that means two things. Each new rental has to stand much more on its own numbers, and lender policies will diverge more, so shopping strategy matters.
So, if the old play was use your salary plus a bit of rental income from property number 1 to qualify for property number 2 and 3, that latter is now missing a few rungs. Walk us through a simple numerical example of how an investor can still grow from 1 to 3 properties under these rules.
Take an investor couple in the Greater Toronto Area earning a combined $180,000 of employment income, already owning a condo in Milton that rents for $2,500 a month. After expenses like condo fees, taxes, and a maintenance reserve, the net rental income is around $1,500 a month. Under the newer guidance, the bank will typically treat that net rental as tied to the existing mortgage, so they are careful not to double count it for the next purchase. To buy a second rental at, say, $750,000 with a 20% down payment of $150,000, the new mortgage would be around $600,000. At a rate in the low to mid 5% range and a 25-year amortization, the payment is roughly $3,500 a month. If projected rent is $3,200 a month and net after expenses is around $2,200, the lender wants to see that this property almost debt services itself, with the couple's employment income covering the gap and all other debts. The path to a third property is to repeat that math. Each additional door needs strong net rent, realistic expenses, and a conservative assumption about vacancies and interest rates.
You mentioned lender differences. Under these rules, what are the 2 or 3 big strategic levers that still let a GTA investor grow instead of just being told no by their main bank?
The first lever is income allocation. Investors need to be intentional about which mortgage gets supported primarily by employment income versus rental income so that they do not accidentally trap their strongest income on the least scalable property. Often it makes sense to anchor your own home and your first rental to salary and bonus income. Then make sure the next rentals are underwritten on their own net cash flow with clear leases, tax returns, and expense documentation. The second lever is property selection. Under the income producing rules, lenders care a lot more about whether the rent genuinely covers the mortgage, taxes, and a realistic maintenance line. That pushes investors towards slightly lower price points, secondary suites, or value add properties where you can increase rents through legal basement apartments or unit upgrades. The third lever is staggering terms. If you have 3 mortgages, you probably do not want all of them renewing in the same year under an uncertain rate environment.
Let us drill into that property selection piece. Suppose someone is choosing between a flashy downtown condo and a boring duplex in Hamilton or Oshawa. How would you compare those two using the 2026 rules? Give us some numbers.
Take the downtown condo at $850,000 with a 20% down payment of $170,000, leaving a mortgage of $680,000. At a similar 5% area rate and 25-year amortization, the monthly payment is just under $3,900. Add condo fees of $600 and property tax of $300, and you are well over $4,700 a month in carrying costs. If market rent is only $3,200 to $3,400, you have a negative cash flow of roughly $1,300 to $1,500 a month. Under the newer classification lens, that is high risk for both you and the lender. Now compare a duplex at $700,000 with a legal basement suite. A 20% down payment is $140,000, leaving a mortgage of $560,000. At similar rates and amortization, the payment is about $3,200 a month. Add taxes and insurance for maybe $500, and you are at $3,700. If the main unit rents for $2,400 and the basement for $1,800, you are at $4,200 of gross rent and likely around $3,100 to $3,300 of net rent after realistic expenses. That property not only covers itself, but leaves room for maintenance and vacancy, which fits far better with how lenders must now view income producing real estate.
Where do investors get into real trouble under these rules? What is the red flag that should make a listener stop and rethink a deal before they write an offer?
A major red flag is any deal that only works on paper if you assume top of market rents, zero vacancies, and you stretch your personal income across 3 or 4 mortgages at once. Under the updated capital treatment, banks are under pressure to stop that kind of double counting. So if you are forcing a spreadsheet to work with aggressive assumptions, the lender is either going to say no or price the risk in a way that hurts you. Another red flag is ignoring renewal risk. If you buy a negative cash flow condo today and your first 2 rentals renew in 2 or 3 years at higher rates, you can find your total debt service ratio blowing up just when lenders are looking more closely at investor files.
And what about using tools like second mortgages or home equity lines of credit to keep growing? Can those still play a smart role, or do they just add more risk on top?
They can be useful if used surgically. For example, a second mortgage against an existing property can free up a $100,000 or $150,000 down payment without forcing you to break a low-rate first mortgage and trigger penalties. The key is that the total payment on your first mortgage plus second mortgage plus all your rental mortgages still fits within reasonable total debt service ratios once you stress test your own numbers. A HELOC can also work as a flexible source for renovations that lift rent, but it is critical to model the interest-only cost at today's HELOC rates and make sure the rent increase more than covers that extra interest.
Bring this home for the aspiring portfolio builder listening in the car. What are the first 3 concrete steps they should take this week if they want to keep growing under the 2026 rules rather than sitting on the sidelines?
First, audit your existing portfolio. For every property, build a simple 1-page summary: current mortgage balance, rate, payment, renewal date, gross rent, realistic expenses, and true net cash flow. That gives you a clear picture of which property is strongest and which one is dragging on your total debt service. Second, design your next purchase to stand on its own. Before you talk to any lender, underwrite the property as if your salary disappeared and only the rent could support it. If the numbers break under conservative vacancy and interest rate assumptions, it is not a growth property in this environment. Third, plan your income allocation and renewal sequence. Decide which mortgage you want primarily supported by employment income and which ones you want classified as truly income producing. Then avoid stacking all your renewals in the same year if you can restructure terms now.
To wrap up, here are your 3 key takeaways. First, the 2026 OSFI rules do not end rental investing, but they do end sloppy, highly leveraged income recycling. Each property now has to stand much more on its own numbers. Second, growth is still possible if you select stronger cash-flowing properties, allocate your income strategically, and model your own stress test instead of hoping the lender will approve you anyway. Third, tools like second mortgages and HELOCs are now precision instruments, not blunt weapons. Used carefully, they can help you fund down payments and renovations without blowing up your total debt service. You have been listening to your Mortgage Minute by onlendhub.ca.